Hey everybody, it's Tiffany. I just wanted to do kind of a summary recap video of the previous trimesters. I'm 38 weeks and 4 days right now, and she is still alive and kicking in there. She seems to be kind of surpassing all of the Trisomy 18 statistics and odds so far, so let's hope that that keeps going. But kind of digging back into where we went with the pregnancy, um, we found out that I was pregnant on January 16th because I took a pregnancy test at home and it was like solid pink, 2 lines, very pregnant. And prior to that, about, I think it was like the 7th of January, I had thought I had miscarried. I had started bleeding really heavily and had clots and tissue and stuff. And we had issues with miscarriage and infertility with Leilani. I actually had a miscarriage 2 weeks before we conceived Leilani, and that was the only time that I had successfully gotten pregnant. And they believed that that was because all of the hormones were kind of just in the right spot. So I assumed that that's what was happening again. And when we had decided to start trying for a second child, we figured, oh, it's going to take a long time. We're going to start having the same issues all over again. So that on the 7th, I was like, great, here we go again. And then about a week before the 7th, so around like the 1st of January of this year, I had gotten super sick. I thought I had food poisoning. I was so like vomiting, deathbed, like flu type, and we couldn't figure it out, and it was only like 24 hours, but I didn't get sick after that. So we thought it was food poisoning and then a miscarriage, and then we found out I was pregnant, and so it all made sense that that was all pregnancy. So when we found out I was pregnant, most likely we didn't know right off the bat like how far along I was. We thought it was probably a few weeks, like 3-4 weeks, maybe even a little less, because when we finally went into the doctor the next week after the 16th, the baby didn't even have a heartbeat. But at first they were scared about that, telling me that I'm going to have a threatened miscarriage and all these things, but really it was just because it was so early. The fetal pole wasn't even detectable yet. But the issue that we were having was that from the 7th, when I started having the bleeding happen, and we thought that I had miscarried, the bleeding just continued. And it continued for the entire first trimester. And what we discovered was that I had a subchorionic hematoma, or a subchorionic hemorrhage. It's another phrase it's known by. And it was very large. It surrounded about like 90% of the gestational sac, just like blood everywhere. And so what that did was cause me to basically have like a heavy period all the time. And what that made the doctors think is that every single week we went in for monitoring, and they told us that you have a threatened miscarriage, you're going to miscarry every single week. You are going to miscarry, you're going to miscarry. And every single week I did not. And so that's how we started this whole pregnancy. It was just weeks and weeks and weeks of just being told that it's going to not happen. It was very stressful, very upsetting. We didn't know what that was. We hadn't had experience with that before. And around, I think it was like the 12th week, they started me on progesterone supplements because my progesterone levels were really low, basically at a 0. I was a 2. They're supposed to be much higher than that, but I was also still breastfeeding Leilani. So, and breastfeeding has been known to decrease your progesterone levels. So I don't know if that was potentially the cause of that, but we started the supplements, did it for 4 weeks to get me into the second trimester, and the bleeding eventually stopped. So it was probably hormone related. And the subchorionic hematoma, or SCH as it's acronymed, it resolved itself. It healed itself up, and by the 14th week into the second trimester, you would have never even known that it was there. It was completely gone. all of the scans were clear and the baby was in there, still had strong heartbeat, and seemed to be doing fine. So we had about a week, maybe it was the 13th week was when things were okay, and then we had a week to the 14th, and we took the NIPT test, and that's something that I guess some doctors here all do, but really it was because I was 34 years old at the time. I'm 35 now, but anyone from 35 older, they suggest taking that just to, alleviate any risk or whatever. So we took the NIPT test. We got the results back, a few days later, and it was high risk for trisomy 18. And that's what started the rest of this journey in this pregnancy, and it was world shattering. I mean, I remember us sitting in the doctor's room with Leilani, and my husband and I just looked at each other like, what the hell is going on? Like, we didn't know what it was. It's known as Edwards syndrome. Never had heard of it in my entire life. They explained that Down syndrome is trisomy 21. I hadn't known that. But the way that it was explained to us, which is commonly how it's explained to people, is that it's quote unquote incompatible with life, because of these statistics that are associated with kids that have that. It's very bleak. And I've talked about this in some of the other videos. So based off of the information that we were given, we thought, okay, we're probably going to lose this baby. Our baby is not going to live a quality of life that we would want her to live. She's going to be in pain or suffering or die early, or I don't know. Whatever horrible scenario you can think of is pretty much what we were thinking. And the doctors basically were like, we can terminate or you can continue your pregnancy. So start thinking about that. I wanted to know for certain because what we had found out was that the NIPT test, it measures risk. So the probability of, not the diagnosis or confirmation of. So then we set up an appointment for an amniocentesis, which anyone who doesn't know, they put a really long ass needle through your stomach and pull the cells out of there. And they will then test those, and they can give you a confirmation of whether the baby has any type of genetic condition at all. So we made that appointment, but because of the risk of miscarriage associated with amniocentesis before 16 weeks, we had to wait until 16 weeks to be able to do the appointment. So we had, I believe it was 3 weeks that we had to wait. It was really, really hard. This whole pregnancy has been, like, a theme of it is just waiting, waiting and waiting and waiting, which is so painful because your mind just like spins out, coming up with all of these different like scenarios of what could happen, and just, all the feelings that you have, and so much like things unresolved, and it's just tough. So I finally got to the amniocentesis appointment, and they did that, and it was that was a really tough procedure. The after is what hurts really bad. It just extreme cramping, extreme cramping. It's very painful. And then it took 4 weeks for us to get our results back because we found out that the maternal fetal medicine doctor, which is a specialist for high risk pregnancies that they then refer you out to if you have any type of condition like this, the one that we have here did not tell us that all of these things would have to be mailed and shipped through to major metro cities like the ones that we moved from, because they don't do testing here. And so she didn't tell us that it was going to take that long, because it should only have taken about a week. So that was very frustrating. Waiting 4 weeks to find out something is like, I can't even describe it. It was an extremely hard 4 weeks for us. It was torture. And finally, when we did find out, I found out on the phone. I was at the grocery store, and I called the doctor back, and she told me, yes, that the baby was positive. And I mean, I had pretty much known that she was positive. If the risk came back, I mean, it's really rare that you have like a false positive on that kind of stuff. So I had assumed that that's what we were dealing with. So obviously that was hard, and I had to tell my husband, and we had to face that together, and talk about what that means, and it's just not an easy thing to talk about. And everybody deals with it differently, processes it differently, handles it differently. And I think my natural tendency is to start to reach out to connect to people. So I instantly started getting involved when I first heard about the diagnosis back in like the 14th week or something. I started getting involved in the trisomy support groups on Facebook and started meeting moms and learning about the ones who had lost their children and the ones who were still living, and started to get like a better picture of what this whole thing would look like. Started doing tons of research and actually talked to people and doctors and all sorts of stuff. So for me, I felt like my way of coping was to just learn everything I could so that I could understand this better and see what it really was. And that statistically, yes, they have challenges, but there are also a lot of people who are doing or managing. So for me, I saw a completely other side of it from what the doctors had told me. So that helped me to, I think, kind of put things in perspective and start to figure out how I felt about it and what I wanted to do and what I thought would happen, and, you know, all those outcomes that you deal with. And so after we got the diagnosis, at that point they started doing more frequent monitoring. Not as frequent as we're doing now. We're doing multiple times a week right now. But we were, I think, every 2 weeks or every 2 weeks. And then I also let my OB and midwife know that I did not want to work with that MFM anymore. So they, at that point, had referred me up to Children's Hospital of San Antonio. And that's when we started working with the MFM up there. And then they also have a genetic counselor who could go through and explain all of the chromosome makeups, and they don't have that here in the Valley. And then they also have a pediatric heart specialist, so we met with him a few times, and he did scans of the heart, and that's where we learned about all of the different issues. At one point, I was supposed to do an MRI so we could learn more about her brain issues, but that just never ended up happening. So what we learned from the genetic counselor between basically 20 to 30 weeks, like that 10-week span, I was going up there every 2 weeks. We were doing all sorts of different tests. And the genetic counselor explained to us that she has an extremely rare form of trisomy 18, which is already extremely rare to begin with, and that it was so rare that they had no experience with it. So they had to send all of our stuff out to this genetic team somewhere at a university or something to try and understand it better, which is crazy. But when they came back to us, what we learned is that trisomy usually breaks down into being either full or partial. And within partial, you can have some different types of it, like mosaic or like depending on which arm of the chromosome. You can also have other chromosomes mixed into it. So you could be trisomy 18, but also have like, I think like a chromosome 7 or something mixed into it. So what we learned about Ayana is that she is both full and partial, which no one has heard of because it doesn't make sense. So she has full trisomy, which is basically having 3 chromosomes of the 18th chromosome. She has that. But then in 60% of her short arm chromosomes, there's a short arm and there's a long arm that make up one chromosome. 60% of her short arms, not even 100%, are mosaic of another of the 18th chromosome. So she doesn't have any other genetic material mixed in like some of these other other trisomy kids do. Hers are all just 18th chromosome duplications, and hers are also clean breaks between the short and the long. So what that basically meant is that she's like a unicorn, and nobody knows what the heck the unicorn is going to do or how she's going to react. And looking at, cases of other trisomy, it just doesn't apply. So what that means is that when you ask a question like, okay, so they have this and that, what does that usually look like? What does that mean for life expectancy? They tell you, we don't know. We just have to wait and see. So that's pretty much been the response every single time we've asked a question. We just don't know. We just have to wait and see till she's born and see what happens and how she reacts and moves and lives. So as you can imagine, that's been not fun. Not knowing, the constant waiting, having to just figure it out. And basically her issues that we found out during that time is that in the brain, she had the plexus cysts, which is pretty common. Those come and go though. So she didn't have them in the beginning, then they popped up and then they went away, and I think they've come back again. She also had some issues with fusing. So between the two hemispheres, there's a piece that's not fused together. And another issue with the brain that we can't really see yet because we also haven't done an MRI, so we don't know all the details there, but it's really common with trisomy kids that they will have issues with the brain and the area that affects breathing, and that will a lot of times be the cause of death, is that they just literally stop breathing. And I've been told before that when you take a trisomy kid at home, like a baby, that be prepared for having to resuscitate and stuff like that throughout the day. So that's a thing that we don't know, and we won't know until she's born, if that's an area that's affected for her and if it's something that's going to be an issue. So that's something just we have to be mindful of. What that means in general for the brain is that she's going to have developmental issues for sure, and that's common to trisomy. So it's just, and these are all things that we have to wait and see, and they'll do MRIs and stuff when she's born. Her other issues are that she has a cleft palate back in her soft palate. Her front has no cleft palate. Traditional trisomy characteristics are having a cleft palate, having closed fists, having clubbed feet or webbed feet or extra fingers or toes, different kind of disfigurements on the outside. She doesn't have any of that stuff, and they believe that that's attributed to the fact that she has this weird mixture of chromosomes that's not manifesting itself in the traditional ways that it would. On the outside, she looks, on the scans, looks like a normal baby. Doesn't seem to have any issues. The only thing that now has started to pop up recently after 30 weeks is that her femur bone seems to be more of a normal size than the rest of her body, which is much smaller. It's restricted. So that could be possible disfigurement. We won't know. Internally, the other issue she has is her heart. And this is very common to trisomy 18 as well. So she has a VSD, which is basically a hole in the heart, and hers is very large. And it's in the center. And so what that has caused is that they call it an aortic overdrive, I think they call it. Basically an overcompensation where the aorta has to go around the hole instead of just going straight up the middle. And what that can lead to is this thing called tetralogy of Fallot. And that can stop someone's heart. And at this point, she doesn't have that, but because she has the beginnings of it, a hole with the overcompensation of the aorta, it's something they're going to have to keep an eye on to see if that's what it's going to turn into. The VSDs, the holes, sometimes they repair themselves, sometimes they close themselves up. Many trisomy kids also have to have heart surgery. So those are all things that will have to be evaluated once she's born and see exactly what's going on. The rest of her body, her other organs, her stomach, her liver, everything seems to be fine and functioning okay, But again, ultrasounds don't show everything, so we're not going to know until she's born. So there may be other major issues that come up that we just weren't able to see before. And that is pretty much it for her issues. She has, a full head of hair, just like Leilani did, and her dad and I do. We both had thick, heavy hair as babies, and her profile and her face just looks so beautiful. Can't even, when I see it, it's just amazing. And it honestly looks like Leilani, so I think they're going to look very similar to each other, which is sweet. And that's pretty much how all the scans went. At one point, when we had gone up there, I think it was around 30 weeks, she had started to have the fetal growth restriction, which is common. I had already started to have the polyhydramnios, which is the excess amniotic fluid, which suggests that she isn't swallowing the fluid properly. And if that's the case, it also means that she's probably going to have issues with like bottle feeding or breastfeeding. So she most likely will have to be tube fed. So I'll just pump and then provide the milk. But when we started to see the growth restriction, the doctors wanted to then start monitoring me twice a week, just to keep tabs on her vitals and her growth, and especially the placenta, because the placenta started to fail. And that's what was causing my gestational diabetes as well. And the insulin resistance that went with that was all attributed to the placenta. So that's when we then went up to the Ronald McDonald House. I basically packed Leilani and I in a matter of 2 days over the weekend, and we had moved up to the Ronald McDonald House in San Antonio, both the one that was off-site in San Antonio and the one that's in the Children's Hospital. And I was then asked to leave because they called it an administrative error. They said that I should not have been admitted to that hospital, that location, because I was not delivering within 2 weeks. But what I had found out is that basically the people who run the place kind of like had issues in terms of kind of choosing who was going to stay and who wasn't, and that nothing was really being done by rules, and that there were people there who weren't delivering 2 weeks and had been there the whole time. So instead of pressing the issue anymore, I just came back to the Valley and went home, and felt very discouraged because I felt like I'm not going to be able to get my baby the care that she needs. But what we ended up working out is that my doctors here, they were taught how to do the scans that were needed to be done by the doctors in San Antonio. And then they would send the scans up to the doctors in San Antonio for review. And we've been doing that ever since, just going back and forth. And for the most part, she has seemed okay in there. Like, she's still growth restricted. She's not on growth charts at all. Her weight is still very slowly growing, which is good. She's definitely at 5 pounds, 5 ounces. She's heavier than most trisomy kids, but that's still extremely small for a normal baby. So she will, if she lives, she will be in a NICU for certain. And we did have a little bit of a scare in terms of her placenta. I think that was about 4 weeks ago, around that time. And what they had seen was like what they call cord pulsations. So basically the flow of the blood going into the placenta just wasn't right. And that can lead to stillborn birth, which has always been a concern with this as well. And which is why they at first recommended that I induce at 37 weeks, and then they said that I should induce at 39. Because I guess your stillborn birth rate basically increases after 37 weeks. And I told them that I just want to go off of her. If she is fine, her vitals are fine, all of these scans are coming up okay, then just let her be. And let her get these extra ounces that she would get. Because she still would have been in the 4-pound range had I induced when they wanted me to. So I'm just letting it ride and trying to kind of listen to my baby and figure out what she wants to do. which is what I did with Leilani as well. I just let her come when she was ready, and she came 4 days before my due date. So it's highly likely that I will come around my due date. But the issue with that is also that Leilani was 9 pounds when she was born. So the weight of a normal sized baby is what initiates the labor. So the fact that Ayana is only in the 5 pound range, the doctor said that we may be in a situation where she won't be big enough to initiate labor. So induction may still have to happen. So we will just be waiting and seeing what's going on. And just more waiting, because that's all we do is wait. Basically, like, if I could try to describe this pregnancy to somebody who's not been through this, it's just, I don't know, if you've ever had to, like, face your mortality or the mortality of somebody you love. I mean, facing your kid's mortality is pretty crazy, but I mean, having to think about things like, do you want an urn for your child? Do you want to cremate? Do you want to bury? All of the death things, putting together birth plans, completely different this time around. When I put together birth plans for Leilani, it was for a vaginal, unmedicated, natural birth. It's not, you're not having to put in other scenarios, and especially a death scenario. In this pregnancy, I had to create multiple birth plans for vaginal unmedicated, vaginal medicated, C-section, death, and I can't remember the other one. And really, you're digging into specifics. So, you're having to really do research and understand and see videos of like what these things are and understand how that impacts your kid. So basically what we had originally decided was that interventions wise to save her life, some people will do everything. Some people want to do nothing and just do comfort care, and then bring them home on hospice and just let them pass. But what we decided we wanted to do was to do interventions up to a certain point. And basically where our line is drawn is if she has to be on a machine to survive. We don't want life support. So because we don't want life support, that also usually means, at these two hospitals at least, some hospitals do it different, but what that means is that she won't be intubated. And because she won't be intubated, that also, at least here, knocks out the possibility of CPR. And originally we wanted CPR up to 3 rounds. So they can still do CPR without intubation, but it's just not as effective. But everything else will be a go in terms of like bagging, what they call positive pressure ventilation, all the regular newborn stuff, anything that's not going in to her body and putting her on a machine. And we won't be doing any type of heart starting drugs, epinephrine and those things. But the main thing is making her comfortable no matter what. I don't want her to feel any pain. Either does her dad. And we will have to kind of take it from there and see how she is. I will say, getting to this point has been such a journey. So many things you've had to think about and talk about, and the biggest one was really, are we going to continue this pregnancy or not? And I felt immediately, yes, I was going to continue the pregnancy for a lot of reasons. My husband was really concerned about her suffering, and I totally got that. I felt that way too, but that was a real sticking point for us, and kind of a hard place for us, and I think it actually caused some problems. But what we learned is that even here in Texas where we live, it's not even legal to have a termination at that late. I think it was almost 24 weeks. So unless the mother's life is being threatened. So it was a moot point and should not have been something we even had discussed. But we did because we didn't know. And I think that's the biggest thing about this whole thing is that it's just like you're going through it and you just don't know anything. You don't know anything. And a lot, honestly, like the doctors don't even really know. So you're trying to figure stuff out all the time. And it's a lot of unknowns and a lot of just lack of information, lack of research. There's not a lot of like research that's done on this. And so I hope that someday this will become one of those focuses, just like autism or Down syndrome, in terms of medical research and trying to inform families better of what this life is like for these kids and what they're actually capable of, rather than just saying no, they're incompatible for life and just, terminate them. But basically, I'm at the home stretch. 38 weeks and 4 days. My due date's on September 25th. It's about a week and a half away. And I'm just kind of waiting. My body hurts, having a lot of sciatica because of the polyhydramnios. My stomach is just like super stretched. It's very painful. And I'm starting to get very anxious and scared and, sad and happy. Just, thinking about all the different things that are going to be coming and what potentially could happen and how that's going to affect me and, playing those scenarios out in my head of, like envisioning what it's going to be like to be in that moment and to experience, specific situations. And how will I react to that? Will I cry? Will I freak out? I don't know. It's hard. But I think the only thing I can do is just wait. And I've done all that I can. I've researched everything. I mean, to the point where I've looked up what it looks like when a baby passes away in utero, and which is very common to this. And then they're born, and what does that look like when they come out? Because the issue is you have to prepare yourself for things like this. Like it's terrifying because the skin, once you start passing, the skin starts to disintegrate. And I've read a lot of trisomy mom stories online about their birth situations. And I mean, one was talking about how she held her baby for, a couple hours after she was stillborn, and the skin literally started to like come off her legs like socks to expose the bones. And, I just wanted to be prepared for things like that so I don't freak out. And that's really hard. But I'm really hopeful. I really am. And I don't feel like it's a false hope. I feel like it's based on what my child is communicating to us through all of these scans. She's moving in there. She constantly moves, which is not common to trisomy. She has a strong, consistent heartbeat, also not common. Her movements are super strong. It's like they're not graceful. She's just like kicking me and poking me, and it's painful, but I'm happy to see strength there. Because you're told a lot that they're just they're more weakened, they don't move a lot, things like that. Mine's not like that. And her issues and all her vitals and everything are just painting me a story that she's going to kind of surprise us all and do things that we are not expecting her to do. And I think all that I can do is, as her mom, support her and fight for her and be her advocate when nobody else is going to be. People are going to tell her no, and I just have to keep pushing for her as long as she does. And if she passes away, which it's more like when, because I don't have long life expectancies, when she does pass away, that's going to be okay too. And I will know that I did everything I could for my kid and that I had her back 100%. And let her show us what she needed to show us. And that is all you can do as a mom. We can't protect them, right? I mean, you have to like let them make mistakes and let them get hurt, and they live their lives, and we just have to be there to kind of like pick them up and support them and fight for them and help them along the way. And I feel like this is not any different than any other situation in that sense, from being a mom. It's just going to be harder. And I'm going to have to learn a lot of medical things if she lives. And if she doesn't live, then that's okay too. I'm going to keep her memory alive no matter what. So that is pretty much like the recap of everything. Sorry, it's a long video, but that's kind of where we're at. I mean, there's obviously a lot of stuff that I've left out in terms of like the effects on the family. And that stuff has been really, I mean, honestly, the hardest part of it all. But I just don't feel like that's the thing to discuss on this video. So that is the medical side of it, of where we're at and where we have been. So if you have any questions, let me know. And I'm curious if other trisomy moms have had some of the same issues, like the SCH and things like that. So everyone, keep your prayers because we are on a countdown. All right, have a good night. Thank you.